I'd been driving since dawn, and the coffee my mom packed was long gone by the time I pulled up to the ranger station. The building sat at the end of a dirt road, all brown wood and government-issue bland. My truck kicked up dust as I parked next to a Forest Service vehicle. I grabbed the cardboard box from the passenger seat. Mom had loaded it with enough food for a week: sandwiches, fruit, cookies, even a thermos of her chili. "You never know what they'll have up there," she'd said this morning, pressing the box into my hands. 24 years old, and she still packed my lunch. The station door was propped open. I walked in and found a man behind the desk, gray hair cut military short. He looked up from his paperwork. "Melvin Cole?" "That's me." "Eddie Alvarado." He stood and we shook hands. His grip was firm, calloused. "Ready for your first shift?" "Ready as I'll ever be." He pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the desk. Standard employment forms. W-4, emergency contacts, the usual. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a photocopied sheet, the kind that's been copied so many times the text gets fuzzy around the edges. "And this." He set it on top of the folder. I picked it up. At the top, in bold letters, night shift instructions, fire lookout tower 7. Below that, 5 numbered rules. 1. If the radio buzzes with no voice, turn it off immediately. Do not respond. Do not try to adjust frequency. 2. You may hear a woman screaming from the forest. Do not leave the tower. Do not call for help. The screaming will stop after exactly 23 minutes. 3. If the forest goes completely silent, no birds, no insects, no wind, close all curtains and sit in the center of the room. Do not look outside until sounds return. 4. Between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. someone may knock on the tower door. Do not answer. Do not speak. They will leave after the 3rd set of knocks. 5. After midnight, count the windows every hour. If the number changes, do not acknowledge it. Continue your duties as normal. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. "Okay, who put you up to this? Is this like a new guy thing?" Eddie's expression didn't change, not even a twitch. "Everything you need to know is on that paper," he said. "Follow the instructions and you'll be fine." I waited for him to crack, to smile, to give me some sign this was all a joke. Nothing. "You're serious. Your shift starts at 6. Tower's stocked with supplies, but I see your mother took care of you." He nodded at my box. "Smart woman. Radio check-ins are every 2 hours. Channel 16. Ember Howard works dispatch most nights." He walked around the desk and headed for the door. I stood there holding the paper, looking between it and him. "Wait, that's it? You're not going to explain?" "Follow the instructions." He stopped at the door. "First week's always the hardest. After that, you get used to it." And then he was gone, leaving me standing there with a box of my mother's food and a list that made no sense. The tower stood about 4 miles up a winding forest road. I could see it from a distance, rising above the tree line like a giant metal skeleton. The actual observation cabin sat on top, windows on all sides to spot smoke. A narrow metal staircase spiraled up the outside. I parked at the base and looked up, 120 feet, according to the job posting. I grabbed my box and started climbing. The stairs rang under my boots, a metallic echo that seemed too loud in the quiet forest. Halfway up, I had to stop and catch my breath. The box wasn't heavy, but climbing with it threw off my balance. I set it on the landing and looked out over the trees. Miles and miles of pine and fir stretching to the horizon. No houses, no roads visible from here, just forest. The cabin at the top was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 12 by 12 feet, windows on all sides like I'd thought. The door was unlocked. Inside, a desk with the radio equipment, a narrow cot against one wall, a mini fridge, hot plate, and a single chair. Basic, but functional. I set Mom's box on the desk and walked the perimeter, looking out each window. 8 windows total. I counted without thinking about it, then realized what I was doing and stopped. That was stupid. Windows don't change. The radio sat on the desk, an old model with actual dials and switches. I'd used similar ones during my forestry training. I flipped it on and adjusted the squelch until the static cleared. "Tower 7 to dispatch. Radio check." A moment of dead air then. "Dispatch to Tower 7, I have you loud and clear. This is Ember. You must be the new guy. Melvin Cole, first shift." "Welcome aboard, Melvin. We've got clear skies forecast for tonight, so should be a quiet one for you. Check in every 2 hours and call immediately if you spot anything." "Copy that." I spent the afternoon settling in. Unpacked Mom's food into the mini fridge, tested the hot plate, figured out how the cot unfolded. Every half hour I'd scan the horizon with the binoculars, looking for smoke columns. Nothing but trees and sky. The sun started dropping around 7. I ate one of Mom's sandwiches, turkey and Swiss, my favorite since I was a kid, and watched the forest change colors. Gold to orange to deep red. Beautiful in a way that made you forget you were alone up here. By 8:30 it was full dark. The cabin had a couple overhead lights, harsh fluorescents that turned everything greenish. I could see my reflection in the windows now, ghostly against the black outside. 9 o'clock came. I was writing in the logbook, noting the temperature and wind direction, when the radio exploded in static. No, not static. Buzzing. Mechanical and harsh, like someone holding down a button and running electricity through the speaker. No voice, no words. Just that awful grinding buzz that made my teeth ache. I reached for the volume knob, then stopped. Rule 1 flashed in my head. If the radio buzzes with no voice, turn it off immediately. It was so specific, so exact. Not if you get interference, or if there's static. If the radio buzzes with no voice. My hand hovered over the power switch. This was stupid. Radios got interference all the time, probably just atmospheric conditions or someone with a bad transmitter. The buzzing intensified, rising in pitch until it sounded almost like screaming metal. I flipped the switch. Silence. I sat there staring at the dead radio, my heart beating faster than it should. Coincidence. Had to be. Eddie probably knew the equipment was touchy, prone to interference at certain times. That's why he'd written such specific instructions. But why not just say that? Why the whole mysterious routine? I waited 5 minutes, then turned the radio back on. Clear static, normal white noise. I adjusted the squelch and keyed the mic. Tower 7 to dispatch. Go ahead, Tower 7. Ember's voice, calm and professional. Did you just try to reach me? I had some interference. Negative, Tower 7. No traffic from this end. Everything okay up there? I looked at the photocopied rules sitting on the desk. Yeah, everything's fine. The next 2 hours crawled by. I found myself checking the time every few minutes, watching the clock on the wall tick toward 11:30. I tried to focus on the job, scanning for fires, logging weather conditions. But my mind kept going back to that buzzing and rule number 2. At 11:25, I was standing by the windows, binoculars in hand, pretending to scan the darkness. Like I could see anything out there anyway. The forest was black, no moon tonight, just stars and the faint glow of my reflection. 11:29. I set down the binoculars. My palms were sweating. This was ridiculous. I was getting worked up over nothing. Some prank list and a little radio static, and here I was watching the clock like the scream ripped through the night. High, piercing, unmistakably human. A woman's voice, raw with terror, coming from somewhere in the forest below. Not far either. Maybe a few hundred yards from the tower's base. I grabbed the door handle before I remembered. Rule 2. Do not leave the tower. Another scream, longer this time. The sound of someone in pain, in desperate trouble. Every instinct told me to run down those stairs, to help. What kind of person just sits there when someone's screaming for help? But the rule had been specific. The screaming will stop after exactly 23 minutes. 23 minutes. Not 20. Not half an hour. 23. I looked at the clock. 11:31. Another scream echoed up from the darkness. I gripped the back of the chair, knuckles white. Someone was hurt down there. Someone needed help. And I was just supposed to sit here and count minutes? I reached for the radio, then stopped. Rule 2 said don't call for help either. The screaming continued. Sometimes words mixed in. Please, I couldn't quite make out. Please and help and something that might have been God, but distorted, like the voice was raw from screaming. 11:35. I tried to triangulate where it was coming from. Southwest of the tower, maybe near the access road. If I ran, I could be there in 10 minutes. 5 if I really pushed it. The screams grew more desperate, more ragged. How could Eddie have known? How could he have predicted this down to the exact minute? 11:40. My legs shook from standing rigid. The screaming hadn't stopped, hadn't even paused. How was that possible? How could anyone scream continuously for 10 minutes without stopping for breath? I made myself sit down, gripped the arms of the chair, watched the clock. 11:45. The quality of the screams changed, less human somehow. Still a woman's voice, but stretched and distorted like a recording played at the wrong speed. 11:50. 3 minutes left. I counted them in my head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. The screaming continued, impossible and unending. 11:52. 1 more minute. 60 seconds. I counted each one. At exactly 11:53, the screaming stopped. Not faded, not died away. Stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was complete. No insects, no wind, nothing. Then, slowly, the normal night sounds returned. Crickets first, then the rustle of wind in the trees, an owl somewhere in the distance. I sat in that chair, sweat running down my back, staring at the clock. 23 minutes. Exactly. The clock on the wall showed 12:17. I forced myself to stand and walk to the window. Everything looked normal down there. Trees swaying in the breeze. Nothing moving near the access road where the screams came from. I went back to the desk and picked up the logbook. My handwriting came out shaky. 11:30 p.m., 11:53 p.m. Heard screaming from southwest of tower. Did not leave position. I stared at what I'd written. Should I add more detail? Say it was a woman's voice? Mention how it didn't sound right? No, just the facts. I set the pen down and rubbed my face. What the hell was that? Some kind of recording maybe? But who'd set up speakers in the middle of the forest? And why exactly 23 minutes? The radio sat quiet on the desk. I thought about calling Ember, telling her what happened. But what would I say? Hey, I heard screaming in the woods but didn't do anything about it because a piece of paper told me not to. I grabbed my water bottle and took a long drink. My throat felt dry. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, making everything look washed out and strange. I walked to each window, checking the forest. Nothing. Just darkness and trees. By 1 o'clock, I'd calmed down enough to eat some of Mom's cookies. Chocolate chip. They tasted like cardboard in my mouth. I kept thinking about that screaming. What if someone really needed help? What if I just sat here while somebody died? But Eddie's face when he gave me those instructions. Dead serious. Not joking around. He knew this would happen. They all knew. I tried to focus on normal tasks. Took another temperature reading. Checked wind speed. Scanned the horizon with binoculars even though I couldn't see much in the dark. Anything to keep busy. At 2 o'clock, I did my radio check. Tower 7 to base, checking in. Copy that, Tower 7. Ember's voice sounded tired. All quiet up there? I hesitated. Yeah, all quiet. Good to hear. Next check at 4. Copy. I set the radio down and went back to staring out the windows. The waiting was getting to me. First the buzzing, then the screaming. What came next? I pulled out the instruction sheet and read it again. Something about knocking between 2 and 4 a.m. and counting windows after midnight. I looked around the cabin. 1, 2, 3, 8 windows, same as before. Why would that change? Around 3, I noticed it getting quieter outside. The wind died down first. Then the rustling in the trees stopped. No more owl hoots. Even the crickets went silent. I sat up straighter in the chair. The quiet spread like something moving through the forest, swallowing up every sound until nothing was left. Complete silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. Rule 3. If the forest goes silent, close the curtains and sit in the center of the room. I froze in the chair. My hands gripped the armrests. I needed to move, needed to close those curtains, but my body wouldn't cooperate. The silence pressed in through the windows. Heavy, thick, like the air itself had weight. This wasn't normal quiet. This was something else. Something that made my skin crawl and my breathing go shallow. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud in my ears. Could hear the blood rushing through my veins. The cabin felt exposed up here, lit up like a beacon. Anything out there could see me. I was on display in this glass box, unable to move, unable to look away from the darkness pressing against the windows. My eyes darted between the windows, searching for movement. Nothing. But the silence. God, the silence was alive somehow. Watching. Waiting. I forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Nice and slow. My legs felt like lead, but I had to move. Had to follow the rules. I pushed myself up from the chair. My knees almost buckled. Every movement felt loud in the silence, like I was disturbing something that shouldn't be disturbed. I reached for the nearest window curtain with a shaking hand. The fabric felt rough under my fingers. I pulled it across, blocking out a section of darkness. 1 down, 7 to go. I moved to the next window. My footsteps sounded wrong on the wooden floor. Too loud, too sharp. I pulled the second curtain closed. Something shifted in the silence. Not a sound exactly, more like a change in pressure, like when you know someone's standing behind you even though you can't see them. I spun around. Empty cabin, just me and the furniture. I hurried to the other windows, yanking curtains closed as fast as I could. The silence seemed to thicken with each one. By the time I reached the last window, my hands were slick with sweat. I paused before closing it, looked out one last time at the darkness. Nothing there, just trees and shadows and that terrible, pressing quiet. I pulled the curtain shut. The cabin felt smaller now, darker despite the overhead lights. I backed toward the center of the room, keeping my eyes on the covered windows. The curtains didn't move. No shadows passed behind them, but I could feel it out there, whatever had brought the silence. I grabbed the chair and dragged it to the middle of the floor. The scraping sound felt like a violation. I sat down, pulled my knees up, wrapped my arms around them, made myself as small as possible. The silence continued. No sound from outside, no wind against the windows, no creaking from the tower structure. Even the fluorescent lights seemed quieter, their usual hum muted. I stared at my watch. 3:07. How long would this last? The instructions didn't say. Just wait until normal sounds returned. My breathing sounded too loud. I tried to make it quieter, shallower, tried not to think about what might be out there in that silence. What might be looking at the tower, looking at the windows, looking for a way in. Minutes crawled by. My legs started to cramp from sitting hunched up, but I didn't dare stretch them out, didn't dare make any unnecessary movement. The silence had weight to it now, pressing down on the cabin roof, squeezing in through the walls. 3:15, 3:20. My watch ticked on, the only sound in the world. Then, gradually, something changed. A cricket chirped somewhere far off. Just one at first, tentative. Then another joined in. The wind picked up, rustling through branches. An owl called from across the valley. The forest was waking up, coming back to life. I stayed in the center of the room, not trusting it yet, but the sounds kept building. Normal sounds, safe sounds. After another few minutes, I uncurled myself from the chair. My joints protested as I stood. I walked to the nearest window and pulled back the curtain an inch. Just darkness and trees, same as always. The terrible watching feeling was gone. Whatever had been out there during the silence had moved on. I opened all the curtains, letting the night back in. Everything looked normal, felt normal, like the last 20 minutes hadn't happened. I dragged the chair back to the desk and slumped into it. 3:35. Still had half an hour before the knocking would start, according to the rules. I rubbed my eyes, already exhausted, and the night wasn't even close to over. The wait felt longer this time. I kept checking my watch, willing the minutes to pass faster. Part of me hoped the knocking wouldn't come. Maybe the screaming and the silence were enough weird shit for one night. Maybe I'd get lucky. At 3:58 I heard it. 3 knocks from somewhere below. Not loud, but clear enough to carry up through the tower structure. My stomach dropped. Here we go again. The knocks came from the door at the base of the tower, the same door I'd climbed through hours ago. 3 measured knocks, evenly spaced. Then silence. I stayed seated, hands gripping the edge of the desk. Rule 4 was clear. Don't answer, no matter what. Another set of 3 knocks. Louder this time, more insistent. I thought about all the times someone had knocked on a door in my life. Friends dropping by, pizza delivery, mom checking if I was awake. Normal knocks with normal people on the other side. This wasn't that. This was something else pretending to be normal. The knocking paused. I counted the seconds. 10, 20, 30. Then it started again. 3 knocks, but softer now. Almost polite. Like whoever was down there didn't want to be a bother. That made it worse somehow. The politeness of it. The patience. I stood and walked to the window facing the staircase. Leaned close to the glass, trying to see down to the base. The angle was wrong. All I could make out was part of the metal framework and darkness beyond. 3 more knocks, then a longer pause. Was someone really down there, or was it just sound without source, like the screaming? I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The metal stairs spiraled down into shadow. No movement, no sign of anyone. The knocking resumed, still 3 at a time, but the pattern changed. Sometimes quick, like someone eager. Sometimes slow and deliberate. Sometimes barely taps. Sometimes hard enough that I could feel the vibration through the floor. But always 3. Never more, never less. I backed away from the window and sat on the cot, pulled my knees up again. The knocking continued, patient and steady. How long would this go on? The screaming lasted exactly 23 minutes. The silence maybe 20. But the instructions didn't give a timeline for this. 4:10, 4:20, still knocking. Sometimes it stopped for a minute or 2, and I'd think it was over. Then it would start again. 3 knocks. Always 3. I tried not to picture what might be standing down there. Tried not to imagine a face looking up at the lit windows. Waiting. Knocking. Waiting. 4:35. The knocking stopped. I waited, muscles tense. Counted to 60, then to 120. 2 full minutes of silence. It was over. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool night air. I stood on shaky legs and went back to the desk. The clock showed 4:37. I needed to do a radio check at 4, but I'd missed it. Too focused on the knocking. Ember would understand. Maybe. I reached for the radio, then stopped. My hand hovered over the power switch. What if it buzzed again? I pulled my hand back. Later. I'd check in later. I went to each window, scanning the darkness, looking for anything out of place. The access road was empty. The clearing around the tower base showed nothing unusual, just dirt and scattered rocks in the dim starlight. Then I saw it. Movement in the trees to the east, pale against the dark trunks. I grabbed the binoculars and raised them to my eyes, adjusted the focus. The trees jumped into sharper detail, but whatever I'd seen was gone. I swept the binoculars back and forth. Nothing. I lowered them and looked with just my eyes. There, a flash of pale something moving between the trees, too far away to make out details, too dark despite the starlight. It moved wrong, not like an animal, not like a person either, sort of drifting, gliding maybe, staying just at the edge of what I could see. My hand went to the window latch before I caught myself. Rule 5, don't open windows after midnight. I pressed closer to the glass instead, trying to get a better look. The pale shape paused between 2 pine trees. I got the impression it was facing the tower, watching, just like I was watching it. We stayed like that, me at the window, it at the tree line. A couple 100 yards between us, but it felt like less. Like if I opened the window, I'd hear it breathing. The shape moved again, drifted left, disappeared behind a thick trunk, reappeared further down, always keeping to the edge of the forest, never coming into the clearing. I followed it with my eyes as it worked its way around the tower, north to west, west to south, like it was circling, studying the tower from different angles. When it reached the area near the access road, it stopped, right about where the screaming had come from earlier. The pale shape stood motionless among the trees. I wanted the binoculars but didn't dare look away, didn't want to lose track of it. So I watched with naked eyes as it stood there, waiting, being watched and watching back. Then it turned, I think it turned, and drifted back into the deeper forest. The pale color faded between the trees until I couldn't track it anymore. Gone. I stayed at the window for another 10 minutes, searching for any sign of it. Nothing moved except normal forest movement. Branches in the breeze, maybe a small animal in the undergrowth. 5:02 a.m. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, just barely, but enough to notice. Morning was coming. I sat back down at the desk and picked up the pen, stared at the logbook. How did I write any of this down? I sat back down at the desk and picked up the pen, stared at the logbook. How did I write any of this down? A woman in a tattered white dress. The dress hung wrong on her, like it was wet or made of something heavier than fabric. Long dark hair fell past her shoulders. She stood perfectly still, facing the tower. I squinted, trying to make out her face in the dim light. Something was wrong with it. The features seemed to shift when I tried to focus on them. One second I thought I saw a normal woman's face. The next it looked different. Like the parts didn't line up right. Like someone had taken a face apart and put it back together slightly off. The woman tilted her head up toward my window. She smiled. The smile stretched too wide. Way too wide. It kept going past where a mouth should end, and I saw too many teeth. They caught the faint light like they were wet. I stumbled backward, my heel catching the chair leg. The binoculars swung hard against my chest as I grabbed the desk to steady myself. My eyes stayed locked on that window, on that thing down there still smiling up at me. The radio burst to life, not static this time. That mechanical buzzing filled the cabin, louder than before. It drilled into my ears, made my teeth hurt. I reached for the power switch, remembering Rule 1, turn it off immediately if there's buzzing with no voice. But then a voice emerged from the static. Melvin Cole. My hand froze over the switch. The voice sounded wrong, distorted like it was coming through water or played at the wrong speed. Melvin Cole. Melvin Cole. It kept repeating my name, not just Melvin, my full name, over and over. The buzzing continued underneath the words, making them vibrate and echo. Melvin Cole. Melvin Cole. Melvin Cole. I lunged for the off switch and flipped it. Nothing happened. The radio kept broadcasting. The voice got louder. Melvin Cole. Melvin Cole. I flipped the switch again. Off, on, off. The voice continued. I yanked the power cord from the wall. The radio should have died instantly. It didn't. Melvin Cole, Melvin Cole, Melvin Cole. A metallic clang echoed from outside. Then another, the sound of feet on metal rungs. The woman was climbing the tower's ladder. I rushed to the window facing the staircase. She'd already made it past the first landing. Her dress billowed around her as she climbed, and her movements looked wrong, too smooth, like she was being pulled up rather than climbing. Her face stayed tilted up toward the cabin. That terrible smile still stretched across features that wouldn't hold still. Another clang, another rung. She moved faster now. The radio kept screaming my name. I grabbed it and shook it, looking for batteries, for any way to make it stop. The thing was completely disconnected, but the voice just got louder. Melvin Cole. Melvin Cole. More clanging. I looked out again, halfway up now. Her hair whipped around her face in a wind I couldn't feel. The smile had gotten wider. I backed away from the window. My shoulders hit the far wall. There was nowhere else to go. The cabin was 12 by 12 feet. A box. A trap. The clanging stopped. She'd reached the top. The radio voice cut out mid-syllable. Sudden silence filled the cabin, broken only by my breathing. I pressed myself against the wall, watching the door. The handle turned, just a little twitch at first. Then it rotated slowly, like someone was testing it. The door was locked. I'd locked it after the knocking stopped. I was sure of it. The handle turned all the way. The lock clicked open. The door rattled in its frame. Once, twice. On the third rattle, it burst open so hard it slammed into the wall. The woman stood there. Up close, her face was worse. The features kept sliding, rearranging. One moment she had 2 eyes, the next 3, then 1. Her mouth moved to the side of her face, then back to the center. The smile never changed though. Too wide, too many teeth. Her dress wasn't white anymore. This close, I could see the stains. Dark patches that might have been blood, or mud, or something else. The fabric hung in tatters, revealing skin underneath that had the same shifting quality as her face. She stepped into the cabin. Her bare feet made no sound on the floor. I pressed harder against the wall. My legs wouldn't work. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. She stood between me and the door. She reached toward me. Her arm stretched longer than it should, fingers extending like they had extra joints. The hand opened, palm facing me. The skin on her palm writhed and shifted like something was moving underneath it. The fingertips were inches from my face when the sunrise broke fully over the horizon. Light flooded through the windows. Real sunlight, bright and golden, hit the cabin from the east. It caught the woman full in the face. She shrieked. The sound was nothing like the screaming from the forest. This was higher, sharper, like metal tearing. Her mouth opened impossibly wide, and that shriek poured out along with something that looked like smoke or steam. The light hit her everywhere at once as the sun cleared the trees. Her dress began to dissolve. Not burning, just coming apart, like smoke in reverse. Her skin went next, wisping away in gray threads. The shriek continued even as her mouth disappeared. In seconds, she was gone. Just gone, like she'd never been there at all. The radio went silent. I collapsed into the chair. My legs just gave out, and I dropped hard onto the seat. My hands shook worse than they had after the screaming. My shirt was soaked with sweat. I sat there breathing hard, staring at the open door. Normal morning light filled the cabin now. I could hear birds starting their day. A breeze came through the doorway carrying the smell of pine and earth. My watch showed 6 a.m. exactly. An engine sound drifted up from below. I recognized the rumble of Eddie's Forest Service truck. I heard it slow at the tower base, then the engine cut off. A door slammed. I kept sitting there, trying to make my breathing normal again. Eddie's footsteps clanged on the ladder. I waited by my car at the base of the tower, everything I'd brought packed back in the box. The sun was fully up now, maybe 8 in the morning, and the forest looked completely normal. Birds singing, breeze moving through the trees, everything green and peaceful. You'd never know what this place turned into after dark. My hands had finally stopped shaking about an hour ago. I'd come down from the tower around 6:30 after Eddie climbed up and found me sitting there. He'd taken one look at my face and said, "You made it through. Good." That was it. No questions about what happened, no concern about whether I was okay. Just told me to pack up and he'd meet me down here when I was ready. So I packed, folded the cot, cleaned out the mini fridge, put Mom's food box back together. Even wiped down the desk, though I don't know why. Maybe just to have something to do with my hands. The whole time I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see that woman's face pressed against the glass. But there was nothing. Just morning sunlight and trees. I heard Eddie's boots on the ladder before I saw him. He came around the side of the tower carrying the logbook I'd left on the desk. The instruction sheet with the 5 rules was tucked inside it. "Got everything?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, it's all here." He flipped through the logbook, scanning my entries. Temperature readings, wind speeds, the note about hearing screaming from the southwest. Nothing about the woman in white or her face that wouldn't stay still. Nothing about her fingers reaching for me or the way she'd burned up in the sunlight. I hadn't known how to write any of that down. "You followed the rules," Eddie said. It wasn't a question. "Every one of them." My voice came out steadier than I felt. When the radio buzzed, I turned it off. When the screaming started, I stayed put. Closed the curtains when the forest went quiet. Didn't answer the door when the knocking came. Eddie closed the logbook and looked at me. His weathered face showed nothing, but something in his eyes seemed almost impressed. "Most people don't last one night." The words hit me like cold water. "Most people? We've had 12 come through in the last 2 years. You're the second to make it to morning." I stared at him. 12 people. 10 of them didn't make it. "What happened to the others?" "Didn't follow the rules." "No, I mean..." I stopped, trying to find the right words. "What are those things out there? The woman, the screaming, all of it. What are they?" Eddie shrugged, tucking the logbook under his arm. "Nobody knows for sure. Forest Service has theories. Some kind of gas leak that causes hallucinations. Magnetic fields that mess with your brain. Old mining chemicals in the ground." He met my eyes. "But between you and me, I don't think anybody really believes that stuff." "Then why?" "The rules work," he said simply. "That's all that matters. Follow the rules. You survived the night. Don't follow them." He didn't finish. I thought about the woman's fingers, inches from my face. How real she'd looked, how solid, until the sunlight hit her. No gas leak did that. No magnetic field made her climb that tower. "The rules have been around longer than me," Eddie continued. "Passed down from ranger to ranger. Somebody figured them out, probably the hard way, and wrote them down. We don't know why they work. We just know they do." I pulled the tower keys from my pocket. 3 keys on a simple ring. One for the door, one for the equipment locker I'd never opened, one for the gate at the bottom of the access road. Such ordinary things for such an unordinary place. "I quit," I said, holding out the keys. Eddie took them without surprise. "Figured you would. Most do, even the ones who survive." He pocketed the keys. "No shame in it. Takes a particular kind of person to work this tower." "What kind is that?" "The kind who can follow rules without asking why. The kind who can see things that shouldn't exist and just accept them. The kind who can come back night after night knowing what's waiting. He shook his head. Haven't found many of those. I thought about that. About coming back here tonight, tomorrow night, every night. Sitting in that cabin while the screaming started. Closing the curtains when the silence came. Watching that woman circle the tower, knowing she'd try to climb it again. My stomach turned. What about you? I asked. You ever work nights here? Once, Eddie said. 23 years ago. Lasted a week before I transferred to day shifts. Been running the station ever since. He shifted the logbook to his other arm. The Forest Service needs someone at this tower. Fires don't stop happening just because the sun goes down. So we keep trying to find someone who can handle it. And if you can't, we'll keep looking. Always someone who needs a job bad enough to try. He started walking toward his truck. Your last check will be mailed to you. 2 days' pay, including tonight. I watched him open his truck door and toss the logbook inside. Part of me wanted to ask more questions. How many towers had these same problems? How long had this been going on? What happened to the 10 people who didn't make it through their first night? But I didn't ask. I was done with this place. Drive safe, Eddie said, climbing into his truck. And Melvin, you did good. Following the rules, I mean. Not everyone can do that when things get bad. He started his engine and drove off, leaving me standing by my car. I got in and sat for a moment, looking up at the tower one last time. In daylight, it seemed so normal. Just a metal structure with a cabin on top. Hard to believe what it became after dark. I started my car and pulled onto the access road. The forest pressed close on both sides, and I found myself checking the mirrors, half expecting to see something pale moving between the trees. But there was nothing. Just shadows and sunlight. About 5 miles down the mountain, I got enough signal to make a call. Mom answered on the second ring. Melvin, honey, how was your first night? Did you eat the sandwiches? I'm coming home, I said. What? But your shift? I'm coming home early. The job, it's not right for me. Silence on her end. Then, carefully, did something happen? Are you okay? I thought about how to answer that. Yes, something happened. No, I wasn't really okay. But I was alive, and that seemed like the important part. Yeah, I'm fine. Just wasn't what I expected. I'll be home in a few hours. All right. She didn't push, which I appreciated. Drive carefully. I'll make lunch. Thanks, Mom. I hung up and kept driving. The road wound down through switchbacks, each turn taking me further from the tower. My shoulders started to relax. The knot in my stomach loosened. 20 minutes later, I reached the main highway and stopped at the first gas station. I needed fuel, but more than that, I needed to get rid of some things. I grabbed the thermos from the passenger seat, Mom's good thermos, the one she'd filled with chili. I'd barely touched it. The thought of eating anything that had been in that tower made me sick. I walked to the dumpster behind the station and threw it in. The thermos hit the bottom with a hollow thud. I stood there for a moment, then went back to the car and got the rest. The leftover sandwiches, the cookies, the apple I'd never eaten, even the napkins she'd packed. All of it went into the dumpster. I didn't want any reminders. Nothing that would make me think about last night when I was trying to sleep. Nothing that would bring back the sound of that screaming or the sight of that woman's shifting face. The gas station attendant watched me through the window, probably wondering why someone was throwing away perfectly good food. I didn't care. I topped off my tank and got back on the highway. The further I drove, the better I felt. The mountains gave way to foothills, then flatlands. The dense forest thinned out, replaced by farms and small towns. Normal places where the worst thing that happened after midnight was maybe a bar fight or a speeding ticket. I kept checking the rearview mirror though, couldn't help it. Every time I looked, I expected to see trees pressing close, or maybe something pale moving just at the edge of vision. But all I saw was regular traffic. Other people going about their regular lives, not knowing that somewhere behind us was a tower where the rules were the only thing keeping you alive. By noon, I hit the city limits. Suburbs sprawled in every direction, all concrete and shopping centers and houses packed close together. I'd never been so happy to see urban sprawl. No trees here except the decorative ones in parking lots. No deep forest where things could hide. No silence that meant danger. I made it to Mom's house by 12:30. She was waiting on the porch, worry clear on her face despite her smile. I parked and got out, leaving everything in the car. I'd deal with unpacking later. You look tired, she said, pulling me into a hug. Didn't sleep much. She held me at arm's length, studying my face. The night shift didn't agree with you? No, it really didn't. She nodded and led me inside. The house smelled like coffee and something baking, probably cookies, knowing her. Normal smells, safe smells. I made tomato soup and grilled cheese, she said. Thought you might want comfort food. My throat tightened. After everything that happened, the simple kindness of a hot meal almost broke me. Thanks, Mom. That sounds perfect. I sat at the kitchen table while she bustled around, ladling soup, flipping sandwiches. The familiar routine of it helped steady me. This was real. This was normal. Not like the tower where nothing made sense and survival depended on following rules nobody understood. So, Mom said, setting a plate in front of me. Want to talk about it? I picked up half the sandwich, thinking, what could I tell her? That I'd spent the night in a haunted fire tower, that a woman with a melting face had tried to grab me, that I'd survived only because I'd followed 5 arbitrary rules. The job was just isolated, I said finally. Too isolated. And there were some safety concerns. Safety concerns? Yeah, equipment issues, procedures that didn't make sense. Close enough to the truth. I didn't feel comfortable staying. She sat across from me with her own bowl of soup. Well, I'm glad you left if it wasn't safe. No job is worth risking yourself. I nodded and took a bite of sandwich. The cheese was perfectly melted, the bread golden brown. Such a simple thing, but it tasted like the best meal I'd ever had. Maybe because I'd wondered, somewhere around 3 in the morning, if I'd ever eat Mom's cooking again. I'll start looking for something else tomorrow, I said. Maybe something in town, day shifts only. No rush. Take a few days to rest first. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm just glad you're home safe. Safe. I thought about that word a lot over the next few weeks. I was safe now, yeah, but I'd learned something that most people didn't know, that there were places where being safe meant following rules that made no sense, where survival depended on not asking why. I found a new job pretty quick. Warehouse work, nothing exciting, but it was day shift and there were always people around. No isolation, no strange rules, no radios that worked without power, just regular work with regular problems. But I never forgot that night in the tower, never forgot the screaming that lasted exactly 23 minutes, or the silence that meant danger, or the woman whose face wouldn't hold still. Sometimes, lying in bed at night, I'd think about Eddie saying they'd keep looking for someone to work that tower. Someone desperate enough to take the job, brave enough to climb those stairs, but maybe not smart enough to follow the rules. I wondered how many more would try, how many more wouldn't make it through their first night. I never went camping again. Couldn't do it. My friends would invite me on weekend trips and I'd make excuses. The thought of being out in the woods after dark, even with other people, made my skin crawl. I knew logically that not every forest was like that one. Not every place had those kinds of things waiting in the darkness, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Never took another night shift either. When I changed jobs a year later, they offered me a position that paid more but required overnight hours. I turned it down flat. The hiring manager seemed confused. It was good money and I was qualified, but I just said it didn't work with my schedule. How could I explain that I'd learned some darkness was better left alone? The dreams lasted about 6 months, not every night, but often enough. I'd be back in the tower, watching the clock tick toward 11:30, or I'd be closing curtains while the forest went silent around me. The worst ones were when I'd see her face, features sliding around like they were looking for the right place to settle. I'd wake up sweating, heart hammering, and have to turn on every light in my room before I could breathe normal again. But even the dreams faded eventually. Time has a way of softening things, making them feel less real. Sometimes I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it all. Stress from a new job, isolation playing tricks on my mind, maybe some kind of gas leak like Eddie suggested. Almost. Then I'd remember how her dress had dissolved in the sunlight, how the radio had screamed my name without power, how exact those rules were, not guidelines or suggestions, but specific instructions that meant the difference between living and dying. You don't imagine details like that. I looked up the tower once about 2 years later, found an old Forest Service report online that mentioned it. Tower 7, built in 1958, steel frame construction, 120 feet tall, still operational, still staffed. There was even a job posting. Night watch position, competitive pay, housing allowance included. Same requirements I'd answered. The posting had been up for 3 months. I wondered if anyone had taken it, if they'd lasted longer than I had, if they were up there right now, watching the clock, counting windows, waiting for the screaming to start. But mostly, I tried not to think about it. I had a normal life now, a day job, an apartment in the city, friends who didn't know I'd once survived a night that should have killed me. I was alive, and that's what mattered. Sometimes that's all you can ask for. Sometimes that's enough.